Good evening, you guys. Good evening. I just wanted to jump on for a minute. I'm sleepy. I need to take a nap, but I wanted to come on and talk to you guys real quick because I had a message, and I'm not sure, Queen Keish, if I responded to your message, but I just was sitting here thinking about it. That you had sent me a message and asked me about them adding that manslaughter charge, and asked me to explain it. And remember at the beginning, I talked about before opening statements. I talked about what happened with the George Zimmerman case, about the adding of the lesser included charges at the end. And I talked about me not liking when the prosecutors do this. And that even though in a situation where they add these lesser included towards the end of the trial, a lot of times it does impact whether or not juries convict because in a lot of situations, the jurors will look at them adding those lesser included like they did not meet the burden of proof for the case that they brought against the defendant. And so there has been some data, I guess, collected that shows that when the prosecutors add those lesser included like that, a lot of times they end up getting not guilties returned back because it kind of like signals to the jury that you haven't proven your case, right? And so even if like say like let's look at George Zimmerman's situation. If if they did not think that he was guilty of the original charges, they should have been able to find him guilty on one of those lesser included charges. But a lot of people feel like the reason that the jury had a not guilty and returned a not guilty is because they just will automatically, when that happens, jurors will automatically, and this doesn't, it's not attached to any type of racial bias or a racial category or anything like that. It's just that jury members are more likely to find not guilty when this happens, right? So what what happened in the Zimmerman case, in a lot of cases, and then we saw in the Carmelo Anthony case, is that at the end, towards the end, prior to them sending the jury off to deliberate, they can have oral arguments or whether or not they want to allow the jury to convict of a lesser charge, right? Now, I'm gonna tell you why I don't like this. And in this situation, I think it's even more sour for me. And why I said in this situation, I was willing to go with it because I knew they was gonna find that boy guilty of something. So y'all know at the beginning I told y'all I don't like this lesser included shit. I don't. I don't like nothing about it when they are able to do this. It is something that the prosecutors are able to do. It's within their power to do. As long as the judge, agrees to it. But I don't like it. But they are allowed to do it. And so what it's saying is that the jury can consider something lesser. So in the Carmelo Anthony case, the arguments were over the manslaughter charge, and I think that there was an argument over whether or not he could be found guilty of aggravated assault or something like that with a deadly weapon or something. That was thrown out completely. That wasn't under consideration. Um, but they did allow the manslaughter charge to be considered. And y'all, in this case, I really, really feel a sour way about it. Like, even if the jury would have convicted him of it, I would have felt like, yeah, by definition, that is probably what he did and what he should have been found guilty for, if anything. I don't believe, based on the details that have been unfolded, not the ones that the mainstream media put out there, but the details of the case, that the reporters that I consider to be reliable in their reporting from the courtroom, and the way that they discussed that those witnesses got on that stand and testified and stories was all, I don't believe that none of he should have been found guilty of none of that after all of that story was told. But based off of how it was being reported to the mainstream media and how I knew that jury was probably listening to the information, I knew he was going to be guilty of something. And so to me, it was better for it to be the manslaughter than for it to be the first degree murder. When they returned back that first degree murder charge, I knew he was getting upwards of 20 years, because if not, they could have just found him guilty on that manslaughter charge and went in between the 2 and 20. So the purpose of them convicting him of the first degree, and this is my opinion. I know it's a lot of people who, and is legal experts and everything. You know, they say, well, according to the law, yes, he did, and I understand all of that. I'm not disputing none of that, right? But I felt like if they were going to give him anything less than 20 years, they could have just found him guilty on the manslaughter charge, which carries a weight between 2 to 20 years. The reason why they found him guilty on that first degree murder was so that they could give him more than the 20 years. And so I knew that he wasn't going to get nothing less than 20. But this is the main reason why in this situation, I am so disgusted about them adding the lesser included. Y'all know I told y'all that I don't like that shit. And I didn't say why. I didn't say why. Now I'm going to tell you why I don't like when they do that shit. I don't like when they add those lesser included, because it does not give the defendant the opportunity to plead guilty. That's why I don't like it. When they overcharge and they pursue an overzealous prosecution, and no matter what anybody said, that's what I feel this is. I don't give a damn. I don't care what the verdict said. I don't give a damn. This was an overzealous prosecution. They could have charged him with a manslaughter charge, a second degree charge, assault, some other, whatever. They could have charged him with all of that shit from the get-go. And then his attorneys could have properly advised him, talked to him. He could have decided whether or not he wanted to plead guilty to those lesser charges. But once you get into that trial and they are trying you on a first degree murder charge, and you are saying, no, absolutely, I did not do that, I'm not pleading guilty to that. And then they get there, and at the last inning, they get to add that shit and you don't get an opportunity to say at that time, I want to plead guilty to that charge, or at least to my understanding, they aren't allowed to do that. I've never seen anybody be asked, do they change their plea at that time? If I feel like, and this is my opinion, if they prosecutors are allowed to do that in the last inning, at the last minute, then the defendant should have the opportunity to change their plea at that point. Because the defendant might be willing to say, okay, I admit to doing that. If you allow a prosecutor to see how a case plays out, and then if they see that the shit might not be going in the direction they wanted to go, so we want to add these things here at the end so that we can make sure we get a conviction on something, then how come you don't allow the defendant? I just feel like that is a due process violation for that even to be allowed. I feel like that messes with somebody's due process to allow that to happen. And like I said, I know that this is all stuff that's allowed. I know it's reasons and justifications for why it is allowed. I don't agree with this shit. If the prosecution has the right to pull that shit at the end when they see, it might be some trouble, we might not be able to get the conviction on this. And it was an ace in the hole on this for this case, right? That they was gonna get that first degree murder as fast as that jury came back. But whereas I think the jury was confident in the verdict they was gonna return, I don't think that the prosecution was as confident when they got to that part. I think their confidence was a little bit shook. They knew the issues with their case, even though the public wasn't being made aware of all of the things that was going on in the courtroom, all of the things that was testified, all of the things that was said, actually said. all the testimony that was actually given. The public did not know. So the public is looking at it like based off of what the mainstream reporters were reporting that, oh, that the prosecution's witnesses was on point and the defense witnesses got their stories got tore apart because that is how the story was being told through mainstream media sources. So that's why a lot of these people think that. That's why a lot of these people saying that. And then every time somebody try to come on and tell them what was actually happening in the courtroom, what was actually happening with the prosecutors' witnesses, they don't want to receive that because they trying to go off of the mainstream reporter. Some of these people, it's their news sources, their people that they sent in to do this reporting, and they didn't properly dictate and send back to them what was happening in the courtroom. So of course they're not going to contradict that. They're not going to go against that. They're going to go with the narrative that was painted by their reporters that they paid to go into that courtroom. They're going to go with the narrative that the rest of the mainstream media is going with, which is not the actual testimony that was given by the witnesses for the prosecution. None of those witnesses from the prosecution had credibility. It was one that said he didn't even want to be there. And that one that said he didn't want to be there, that he only saw the prosecutors, I think, like 2 minutes before he got on the stand. He is the one that testified to Carmelo being called over to the tent. And he was the one who testified about Carmelo asking about the weather being bad. And he responded and said, yeah, it is. He was the one who said that Eddie asked to switch seats so that he could sit next to Carmelo, and they started having a conversation. This is all what that witness said. That was a credible witness for the prosecution. For the prosecution. But that's not something that you're hearing reported accurately, because that is not the narrative that the people want to give. That is not what they want out there. And so the reason, and this is predominantly for Queen Keisha because she asked me the question and I didn't message it back to her. So I figured I would just come live and explain it. The prosecutors in the last minute, most of the time it happens before the jury starts deliberation, after either the defense team puts on that case or they don't, one or the other, whichever one. Then right while they're going through jury instructions and things of that nature, the prosecutors can decide that they will allow the jury to deliberate on lesser charges. And then, well, that they want them to be able to. And then there will be some conversation between the prosecution, the defense, the judge. The judge will determine whether or not it will be allowed. In a lot of situations, it is allowed for them to be able to deliberate on the lesser charges and return a guilty verdict on those lesser charges. So that is what happened. So that is what happened in this case. That is the same thing that happened in the George Zimmerman case. It happened in several other cases. It happens a lot, but it's something I don't agree with because I some kind of way that things, in my opinion, this is a violation of due process because the defendant is not allowed, to my understanding, to change his plea once they do that. The prosecutor can make a decision to add those lesser included, but the defendant can't say, hey, you want to know what? You add that. I'm willing to admit I did that. I'll plead guilty to that. They aren't able to change their plea. And to me, it's just I'm sure nobody has ever raised the issue of due process on this situation. But in my opinion, I feel like it is a due process violation. A defendant should be able to look at what they are up against and decide whether they plead guilty or not. And when the prosecutor is able to do things like that, in the end, even though in the Carmelo Anthony case, it wouldn't have mattered because they found him guilty of the first-degree murder, right? But this is my thing. What if he was willing to plead guilty to the manslaughter? And that's what I have the problem with. They wouldn't have even needed a jury. He could have pled guilty. They would have sentenced him to whatever they sentenced him to, and he would have went to jail to serve his time or got probation or whatever it is that the sentence would have been. based on his guilty plea, and that would have been that. They wouldn't need the jury to render a verdict. But I feel like it is a way to like catch a dog. And I hate to use that because people are dogs, but that's how it's like this is how you catch a dog. You corner the dog, right? Like you corner them, you hit them with the hardest thing, and now he has no way out. He has no way out because the only person to determine now he can't change his plea. The only people who get to determine are the jury. And he may, his parents, his legal team, someone else by his own admission, he might have been willing to plead guilty to that. And they took away, in my opinion, and this is when they do it to anybody, not just to him, doing that to anyone is a violation, in my opinion, of a person's due process rights when you do that. Because the person who is saying not guilty to that charge when they were overcharged, they might say, I'm going to defend myself because you are saying that I did this, and that's not what I did. But if you properly charge me with what I did, I might be willing to admit to doing that and taking my punishment for that, so that I don't have to be worried and sick to my stomach about whether or not you charging me for some bullshit that I did not do. Okay, you caught me. I did it. In this instance, he didn't even have to be caught. He admitted to doing it. It might have been something, and I don't know what would have been the decision. You know, if the charge had been something more appropriate for the occasion. But it's possible that his plea would have been different. And now you took away the defendant's right to decide whether they want to plead guilty to a lesser charge. But you're allowed to allow the jury to consider the lesser charge. And no opportunity for them to change their plea. And that's to my understanding. Now, maybe it is. And if anybody out there knows that it's a vehicle to where the plea can change, once they do that, then let me know. But from my understanding, hey, Queen Keisha, I was just responding to your question about them adding that manslaughter charge. So you can go back and listen to the beginning of this live because I was about to end the live. But if you go back and listen from the beginning, it'll explain to you what that was about and why I don't like when that is done. But I don't like it. To me, it is a huge constitutional violation. To me, in my opinion, and it's probably my own little opinion. Nobody else probably even thinks there's anything wrong with it. But in my opinion, if the defendant cannot change their plea to guilty when you add those lesser charges, if they can't plead out guilty to one of those lesser charges, then the prosecutor shouldn't be able to add it. They shouldn't be able to add it. It's a way in order to throw a win to the prosecutors, even though they came and overcharged the defendant. And that is the reason why I say that even in situations where I may feel that the defendant did commit the lesser crime, it makes me reluctant to want to say, okay, yes, I will find them guilty of it, because I know what it is, why it was designed, why they did it. You get to put on the case, look at how the case is going, and then decide that you want to add some shit. But you don't give that defendant the opportunity to say, okay, you want to add that? I'll plead guilty to that. I'll plead guilty to that. No, it's not like it's not right. It's wrong. That I don't like nothing about that shit. Nothing. You said the jury rejected it, shaking my head. Yes, but this is so my thing, Queen Keisha, what I was saying is the reason why I was explaining the reason why I don't like it. Because remember, prior to opening statements on this case, Remember, I did a live and I was talking about how I don't like when they add those lesser included like that. And I didn't say why, but I just kept saying I don't like it. And the reason I stated it earlier in this video, but the reason I don't like it is because they get the right to add the lesser included charges and allow the jury to deliberate on the lesser included. But the defendant doesn't get the right to determine whether they want to plead guilty to one of those lesser charges. And that is why I just think it's something not fair about that. That is something that is something wrong. Like, that's not justice. If the defendant was presented with a lesser charge prior to all of that getting to that point, it is very well possible that they might be willing to plead guilty to the lesser charge. But to allow a jury to go and deliberate on the lesser charge in addition to the original charges and the lesser charge, and the defendant has no right to say whether or not they want to say they're guilty for that or not, I don't think that's right. I don't think it's, you said I'm mad that he was rushed to prison with the Metcalf family member is the warden. He definitely will. I don't know, because a lot of people are saying that Texas is difficult when it comes to appeals. So I don't know. If I'm being honest, like I said, God is the only, this is what I could say. God is the only person who can change the heart of man. He's the only person who can change the circumstance. And that is the hands that I leave it in, because based on the history, based on the data, I don't know if he's going to be successful on an appeal. I really don't. I really don't. Like I said, I am concerned. You have a boy who was scared enough of these boys that he pulled the knife out in order to try to defend himself. Imagine what that looks like with him being in a prison with grown adult men. He has epilepsy. They said he had had a seizure just a couple of weeks prior to this incident occurring. Like, it's for so many reasons that this is just, and them prisons, I'm sorry, but they don't care. They don't care about the health and well-being of the people in those prisons like that. And a lot of times they can't get people to come into the prison and service the prisoners because of what happens with the prison contracts when it comes to the healthcare system. When they got to get a specialist to come in there and stuff like that, they have to contract that out. And then a lot of times these companies that do contracting for medical care, the reason why a lot of physicians don't want to go to the prison in order to service prisoners is because a lot of them will initially do it. They'll sign up to do it because they can make a lot of money doing it. But what ends up happening is a lot of these contracting companies, they end up going bankrupt. Like, they'll have the prison contract for a few years, maybe 2 to 4 years. They'll have the prison contract. When you have the contract, you get paid up front. So the vehicle is that the contractor gets paid up front, and then they pay these physicians and stuff to come into the prison to service the prisoners. Well, a lot of times they will get backed up on invoices with the healthcare providers, and then when they file bankruptcy, those healthcare professionals don't get their money. And so then that makes them not want to go into the prison no more. Or when they do agree to still do it, then they charge more. They charge more to compensate and offset what is going on. Any physician that goes into the prison to serve prisoners that has any kind of contract, they got to make sure that they stay up on their billing, because if they don't, they could end up losing a lot of money because of this situation. This is a known situation. In Fulton County, y'all know we talked about the Fulton County situation, or how horrible that prison is. Well, I did post on my wall, but I didn't get to speak about, it was the man who got arrested. I'm sorry, he was in the jail, not the prison. Fulton County is the jail. So he was in the Fulton County jail. You said there was a blogger he called to check on him. Didn't know you can do that. I don't think he will be hurt anyway, especially now. It's not about even whether or not he will be hurt by an individual. I'm talking about because of his healthcare needs, that something can end up happening. And a lot of times the right people to deal with prisoners, they are not willing to service the prison because of this issue with these contractor situations. And I was just about to explain it when it comes to that Fulton County prison, the situation that would just happen with that. It was a guy, I cannot remember his name right now, but he had to get his legs amputated and his fingers amputated because he got arrested. They put him in the jail. This is over in Fulton County. Y'all know this jail has already been cited by the DOJ. Okay, so now another investigation. Now the jail is under another investigation. But they are saying that this investigation might lead to some criminal prosecution of some people in the jail. So this guy, he was arrested. They took him to the jail for holding. And I think he was only in there for 11 days, but he needed special medical care because he needed to have, like, I don't know if it was antibiotics he needed to have, like, every day or something. He had some kind of condition where he needed to have some medication every day. And when he didn't have it and he kept telling them he needed it, they didn't get it to him. He ended up developing sepsis. When he got sepsis, they did not call in the proper medical professionals. The jail's excuse was, well, we couldn't find any medical professional to come in at an appropriate rate. And a lot of people don't know what they were saying when they said that because they don't understand how this goes. But I am telling you that the reason why Fulton County, it's probably several reasons why they can't find healthcare professionals to come into that Fulton County jail at a feasible rate, right? But the main reason has to do with that jail's billing and what they did to all of those contractors. When that contract company went bankrupt, they owed correctional officers back pay. Not just medical professionals. They owed back pay to correctional officers. Remember during the YSL when a whole bunch of officers, they had walked out? And it was because of that. And so now they probably have a huge problem. The conditions of the prison and all of that probably have something also to do with why the healthcare providers don't want to go in there. But those healthcare professionals know that if they go in there and they have to invoice these companies, these contractors, they have to invoice them. They got to wait for them to pay the invoice. The contractor already gets paid. They already get paid the money. So it's no reason why they don't pay these medical professionals or they don't pay these correctional officers or whoever they send as a contractor into the prison. It's no reason why they don't do it. But the reason why is because they also know it's a quick way for them to get some quick money and then bounce. All these companies that take on these prison contracts, most of the time, they only have that contract for 2 to 4 years before they file bankruptcy. And once they file bankruptcy, anybody that they owe, guess what? Too bad, so sad. They don't get their money. And that's why they will allow the invoices to back up. And if you have a medical provider or a prison worker or whoever it is, it's the contractor that's not keeping up on their invoices and making sure they're getting their money on time, whatever money is owed to them, they out of luck. They out of luck. And so the medical professionals that know that this is what happens with servicing the prisons, a lot of times when it happens to them, they know to stay up on the billing and to make sure that they are getting paid right away. But they will also sometimes, it impacts their rate because they'll say, okay, if at some point they're going to bail out on me and not pay me, I'm going to increase the rate for me to go in there because I know it's in demand. It's in high demand. And so when the prison official who was speaking on behalf of the prison was saying this, I knew exactly what he was talking about. Yeah, it probably was hard for them to find a medical professional to come in there at a reasonable rate because that prison has gypped the contractor that they contract with that prison. These contracts that they keep getting, They are filing bankruptcy every 2 to 4 years, these companies that they are doing these contracts with. And so it's making practitioners lose money. So they have to compensate some type of way. If the provider is going to continue to contract, they're going to charge the next contractor more money, which means then the prison has to put out more money on the contract. And so that is why you have this situation going on. And like I said, when it comes to his medical condition, I know too many people who have been in prison who have situations with seizures, who have ended up, and I hate to say this shit, but have ended up passing away in their cell because of their seizure condition, because you can really hurt yourself having a seizure in a cell. And if you're not being properly medicated and getting the right medical treatment, then that will increase you having episodes. The stress could increase those episodes. And so as far as his physical safety, when it comes to threats or harm to him by somebody else, that's a given in prison. But I am more concerned about knowing about his medical condition and what can happen, and it could end up and all. I don't even want, my mind been thinking about all of that shit. I don't even want to speak that out there, but I just know when it comes to people with seizures, it's been bad shit. It's been bad shit. And I don't know. I don't feel, but I just wanted to come on here really quick and talk to you because you did ask that question, Queen Keish, and I wanted to make sure I responded. And I didn't want to just message it at that point because I felt like it was going to be too much. But mainly, that's the reason I don't like it. Like I said, I know there are people who know more than me who might have some other thoughts about it, or, you know, I'm sure that there's some excuses and justifications for why that is the case, but I don't like it because it does not give the defendant the opportunity to plead guilty to that lesser charge. And then that way they don't have to put their life in the fate and their life in the hands of other people to decide what happens to them. It is very well possible that if the person wasn't overcharged to begin with, and if you thought that my case was weak, and now I see by the reaction I feel like I'm getting or how I'm hearing the evidence unfold that it's possible that I might not get the guilty on this charge where I overcharged this defendant. So now let me add these lesser things in it. It doesn't give the defendant the opportunity to say, okay, I did that. Okay, I did that. I didn't do what you said I did, but okay, I did do that. So let me take that and then let's get on with it. Give me my sentence for that and let's get on with it. I'm pretty sure that the fucking family wasn't willing to plead guilty to no bullshit to give no damn 2 to 99 years. But maybe he might have been, because of the level of accountability that he was taking at the time, because of how bad he felt and how hysterical he was, he may have considered to plead guilty to a lesser charge. And I just feel like that's not right. That shit is not right. And I don't agree with that. You let a jury decide whether or not they wanted to give him a manslaughter or a first-degree murder charge. But you decided that you was going to put this case on, charge him with a first-degree murder charge, and then say, okay, well, if we didn't prove first-degree murder, y'all can go ahead and consider manslaughter. That's some bullshit. And that's why I don't like it. And that's why I said I would be reluctant to, even in looking at those situations, and this could be for anybody, even in looking at those situations and considering them, even if I felt like the person was guilty of one of those lesser charges, it makes you not want to convict the person. because it's just something that seems not proper about it. It's something that just don't seem fair about it, I think, to a lot of people. I'm probably not the only person. I might be amongst a few people who might feel like it's a due process rights violation, but I'm sure I'm not the only person who feels like that. It just seems like you just trying to bamboozle someone and you trying to trick the people. And so it's a reason. Like when I say, it's not that I don't feel like George Zimmerman shouldn't have been found guilty on something. There were lesser included that I felt like that they could have found him guilty on. But I think those jurors felt some type of way about that the prosecution came to them and told them that this man committed this kind of murder and charged him with this kind of murder. And then at the end came with these lesser charges. And you want us to consider that. And I think that that had an impact on the jurors. And they decided to go with a not guilty. They decided to say, no, you charged him with this, you ain't plead your case, not guilty. Just like the way they ignored it being added with Carmelo and they went guilty anyway, because they already had their mind made up. A lot of the time, I think the jury, by the time it gets to that, they have their mind made up. And so when you throw them that, those lesser included, a lot of times they say that it can end up in a not guilty because the jurors will believe you did not prove your case. Like I said, in this situation, those jurors already had their mind up. I think the prosecutor might have thought that the case looked a little flimsy, and got a little worried, and that's why they wanted to allow it to be considered. But I don't think that those jurors felt like that. Those jurors went into that deliberation knowing what they was gonna do already. That's how I feel. And so they miscalculated. I feel like the prosecution miscalculated because they could have just not even added that shit. But to me, it just also showed how deceptive they were. It just showed how malicious this prosecution was. At the end, when they thought that they might not get the win, they was ready to punt the ball. But he didn't get an opportunity to make a different decision at the end after he saw what happened. And that's the part that I don't, like I said, it's just fucking wrong. It's wrong to do to anybody. This is not just because it's just Carmelo. It's wrong to do to anybody to do that shit. So, you guys, I just wanted to come on and talk about that real quick. I hope y'all have a good evening, and I will talk to you guys soon.